Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. Let me just get my stuff up here. Today is Thursday, April 4th, 2024. It is 7 p.m. on the button. I'd call this meeting of the New Shoreham Town Council to order. This is the second of 3 public hearings that we're doing this year. 2 public hearings. I know we added one. On this year's budget, which is big, and I would ask you, we'll open the public hearing in a second, but please stay for item number 2, which I think is really an essential policy that's going to be parallel to significant budget change. So I'm saying that, I mean, I think the people who have come here tonight know what we're talking about or have been engaged, but I'd say for the people at home who are either watching now or who are listening for a budget public hearing, please don't stop watching when the public hearing is over, because there's the homestead tax matter, which is number 2, is an essential part of the budget discussion this year. So can I have a motion to open the public hearing, please?
Before we do that, could we, there's more, this isn't our last hearing, right?
Yes.
It is our last. I thought the 10th was.
The 10th is the adoption.
Is-
It's more budget, but it's the last public hearing.
Okay. So changes can be made on the 10th as well.
Yes.
Yes, that will be an agenda item.
Okay. I just want to make sure, because there's a very scant audience here and we're talking about big numbers, and I'm concerned. I'm getting an awful lot of phone input when I'm at home, but where is everybody? So
And to that end, if you recall, last year, we did have an additional work session before the adoption meeting, if I recall correctly, Millie, because there were some changes that we made. So, you know, if there's an inclination among the members of the council to do that, you know. Hey, Lisa. So anyway, I've had a motion. Is there a second? No.
second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The hearing is now open. Would anybody like to speak tonight? Hello, Judy.
Thank you very much. Judith Gray, Sands Pond Road, and Chair of the Block Island Sea Level Rise Committee. In going through many pages of budget yesterday and over the last few days, I got to page 24 of 25 of the budget, and I noticed that that North Light and Gracie's Cove were listed as climate adaptation needs, and I was seriously questioning how the hardening of the structure of North Light was a climate adaptation event, or even public access at Gracie's Cove was a climate adaptation event. And so I just wanted to get a little explanation on that. Thanks.
Sure, I'll try to give you mine on those two, and then Amy will actually give you the more correct answer probably. But on Grace's Cove, that has been a as you know, Judy, it has been a festering situation. With, I mean, you could probably just as easily put it under the public safety category as much as a climate resilience. However, the reasons it is happening upland and on the ocean side is because of, the reason it's getting worse is because of storm severity. And I think that was the primary reason it was put under that. It also is, in order to be eligible for the state grant that we apply for that project, we have to have a match. So it's actually a much more substantial project than a $60,000 project. As to Northlight, again, the severity of storms and weather events has accelerated the need to make exterior investments there. It's not it's not investing in a revetment or dune restoration, but
Right.
it's sort of directly caused, if you will, by two things. One is, you know, every budget year we've had an item to invest there. And you know, I'll be just really honest. My sense is that the buckets that were identified are zoomed out. But the idea is we have a number of areas that in my tenure on the town council, you know, Martha has been here longer than I have, always seem to not get done because of the levy cap. And at some point we have to start doing these things, or let the Northlight sink into the, you know, or you know, that's being overly dramatic, but I totally get what your question is, but
Yeah, I'm mostly concerned about sort of overstepping in our explanation. But your explanation back to me is palatable, but it's close to not passing the smell test, if you know what I mean when I say that.
what is it?
Well,
the project
because-
that doesn't smell, or
Well,
is it
no,
the
it's
type?
that it's, what about the North Light has anything to do with climate adaptation? I understand you want to save a building, a historic building, and I can, oh, and maybe that's the category it sits in is, like heritage, you know, protecting our
If we're not
heritage.
adapting that, if we're
Okay.
not adapting
Yeah.
that building to our
Right.
current climate, we're gonna lose it. I think
Right,
is-
and at some point, we're gonna have to accept that as an
we-
inevitable
Yeah.
conclusion. And so it's more like, when are we going to accept that? And I'm good with, yeah, we're going to push that out, you know, 30, that right now, the limit that I've heard from CRMC and other places is 30 years.
Sure.
Whatever you want, whatever we're investing in needs to last for 30 years or longer. And so I can accept that. My concern was that I didn't want us to look greedy and like we were overstepping. And I want to just make sure we're staying in the lines.
I think it's an important and valid,
Okay,
yes.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy. David Lewis.
I didn't, I turned it off, sorry.
I mean, I could hear you without the microphone. David Lewis, I wasn't intending to talk to this topic, but I had the same question about resiliency myself, so I actually looked up the definition. And I was surprised that it covers a lot more territory than necessarily climate change. So reading from the Google dictionary, resilience is the capacity to withstand or to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, the remarkable resilience of so many institutions, the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape. It covers a lot of ground, and especially in this context, Northlight needs the ability to recover or adapt or receive mitigation to recover in the future from storm events.
And I don't know whether, thank you. And I don't know whether it's helpful or if this is even appropriate because it's a public hearing, but I view the Northlight as an opportunity to do education about things like wind energy, climate change. You know, I think it can be an important locus for education and for getting people into that environment that is so threatened. That's my, and literally that's just my opinion.
And I don't disagree with anything that's been said on this topic,
Yeah.
but it is my sense in the community that they're gonna want to know what they're gonna spend the $200,000 on.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, and we're gonna have, next week,
I've already spoken to them, so why don't we make that for the meeting on the 10th?
great, we're gonna have, the people who will be leading those projects, providing the community with greater detail on them. Amy, did I miss in my answer? If it's no, that's fine, I just,
No, I don't think you did at all. And if you hadn't asked, I wouldn't have said anything,
yeah,
except that it is keeping with a broader that broader perspective is not one that is unique to Block Island. A lot of communities a lot of communities at this point are looking at a much broader context for resiliency in general and the climate side of life, because those burdens associated with it are accelerating at such a pace that it is becoming very challenging for most communities to stay where they need to be, never mind get ahead of things. So, you know, I that's the only thing I would add is that we're not unique in taking this broader perspective as a new view of the world.
it also doesn't mean, and I think this is important, and it's important for not just sea level rise, but for the community as a whole. You know this better than anybody, Judy. We've gotten an important grant. We're applying for a very significant new one through congressional appropriations. You know, this is not our plan on resiliency. You know what I mean? And I know you know that, but I think it's important to say that if the North Lake gets restored, it doesn't mean that it's an answer to climate change.
I'm just gonna, I won't talk long. I could. Part of the North Light, to me at least, is the fact that we've got to get, and maybe this is not, well, we need to see what the breakdown of this is, what we can get done this year realistically. We put so much money into that building. But when you talk about, oh, it's not threatened, well, yeah, it's the fourth lighthouse out there. That's why it's not threatened. If you want something that's an example of adapting an educational piece to Keith, that is probably as good an example as you're going to get. You can see from the North Light how Saucon Pond has been, if you know where to look, been breached and recovered naturally, and what nature can do. And you can look at the West Dunes and see, you know, how maybe the west side isn't doing as well. And you have this little narrow strip of land that just recovers and recovers and revegetates and revegetates. And there are places that can do that. Not everything needs to have a committee to save it. But the lighthouse, I think, is a really good centerpiece. And people really, really love that lighthouse. I think it's an opportunity to also get the place opened up again, get some money coming into it, so it will be self-sustaining, because it's and how many towns have two lighthouses? We just take it for granted, and then, you know, we end up with numbers like this every several years, and this is not the first time it's happened.
That's really well put, I think. Any others? Anybody else? Barbara?
Hi, Barbara McMullen,
Hey, Barbara.
Beacon Hill Road. Hi. I had I think a broader question about the additional expenditure, the 8.4% for substantial growth. And the number that was presented to support that was the dollar value of construction permits. And I'm curious about what that looks like in terms of number of construction permits, because if that number is going up because people are building bigger, fancier houses, or because the cost of materials has gone up, that may not be a great way to justify substantial growth. And, I think the things that are on this list are clearly things that are all of benefit and of
Yes.
value to the community. So for me, when you're looking at that large of an additional increase, how do you best support that when people in the community, I'm sure, are going to ask questions about why are we spending so much money? And I agree with Judy that, and this might be just a matter of the terms that are being used, where it says climate adaptation for North Light. Maybe if it just said resilience, or if there was a little bit different way to characterize that, that might make it a little better. And I'm assuming that maybe on the meeting at the 10th, my other question was on the detail of what those funds are being spent on for North Light, and also for the transfer station, the 150,000. But if that's going to come up on the 10th,
On the
then
North Light, it will.
yeah,
On the transfer station, this is part of the value of the capital plan part of the budget. That money has been in the budget for, it's been anticipated to be spent next fiscal year for several years. And that is the overall facility planning process before we make capital expenditures. For example, you go up there and it's pretty clear that we need a new Butler building there. It's really bad. But yeah, exactly. But it also, is it laid out the way it should be? Now that we're going to have composting, there are some other ideas kicking around about alternate approaches to dealing with our trash. Is it safest if, you back in here and you drive across there, and some people drive there and back that way? And, it's an overall facilities plan is really what that is, which would be, I assume, Mary Ann, conducted by an engineering firm or.
Yeah, there'll be someone who does that stuff, absolutely.
Right.
so along those lines too, I was thinking that the transfer station and the volume of materials they move might be another way to show the substantial growth that's taking place in this
That's a really good
community, and
point. Yeah.
how we deal with those.
That's a,
So that to me would be a
yes.
really good justification.
as always, Barbara,
Yeah.
great point.
Yeah. Thank you.
Amy?
Right, and Barbara, you may have just said this. I'm sorry, I was trying to do math, which is a little tricky for me. But when I went to the power company meeting the other night, it sounded as if you guys were seeing substantial numbers of hookups, right?
So we're seeing new hookups, and this is what made me think about what that dollar amount for the construction permits is, because the hookups that we're seeing are for really big properties. Like
Right.
the cost of those is quite high. So that's why it may be that the dollar amount of the building permits is so high, because they're building $10 million houses instead of $2 million
Which
houses.
creates its own demands and pressures, but
It does, but
it's
not
about the
nearly,
data.
not
Yeah.
nearly as much as, one $10 million house probably creates less pressure on the overall community than 5 $2 million houses, or, it's just,
Yeah.
it's just kind of,
Oh, it's
I
really-
find it interesting because I like numbers
Yeah,
to think about how those things line up.
yes.
But yeah, so there's another example where you can look at, from
Right.
the power company point of view, we're feeling that pressure too of being able to supply adequate electricity as more and more and bigger projects
Right.
Right.
come out.
So when that information was given out at the meeting the other night, it sort of corroborated what the information that we've
Right.
seen. And I know the water company, they just filled a pool the other day, right? Because they won't fill a pool in the summer, and that the time frame is coming right up where they won't do that any longer. But it's sort of an interesting thing, right? Did the
Absolutely.
water company ever fill a pool 10 years ago?
And I think there's no question
Yeah.
that the growth that this community is experiencing is putting a lot of pressure on the community. And so I don't have an issue with that concept. I just wasn't
Yeah.
clear about that dollar value for construction
So-
permits. And I think if you're trying to convince people that 8.4% is really needed, you want to have a lot of
Oh, totally.
argument.
Absolutely. That's why this is so valuable.
Yeah.
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 Amy?
Sure, just some additional context, since we have a nice small group, and I know
Yes.
a lot of this crowd will like the numbers that I think the council's heard. You know, so the building permit issuance numbers are not as representative. And one of the reasons that I think that data is a little bit flawed is because compared to, say, 7 or 8 years ago, when I was really deep in those at that time, our small building permit numbers are way down. So we don't have the same number of people pulling permits for small jobs, whether that's because they're not doing them in the same volume that they were, or the permits aren't being pulled, I can't say. But your permit counts are almost identical, but I don't find that as representative of a pattern. Because your mix of business is very different. So we may be at 375 for the last 5 years, but the mix is really not comparable at all and doesn't tell the same story.
And a lot of it is commercial.
But what does tell a story right now is the difference between residential and commercial. And I don't have my little cheat sheet with that. You have yours.
Apologize for interrupting, but I meant to ask this before and thought I would come up with it on my own. What are the commercial permits besides the Island Home?
Well, I'm not going to give you names. I
Well,
mean, we can do them, but
they're all here, so it's not like, I'm not seeing them.
you're not
What
seeing
am I
them.
missing?
Do you want to report?
Yeah.
So in aggregate, which is I think the numbers that we're trying to focus on, our commercial percentage
Right.
is significantly increased. So I think, Mary Ann, you're going to give me the exact numbers, but roughly 20%.
What am I-
22 was 30, and 23 was 40.
Yeah, so in calendar year 22, we were at 30% commercial. I think back 2 years before that, we were down in the 15%, and now we're up to 40% of the total construction value is commercial.
So maybe this is why. Maybe that's using my.
I have a question about that because maybe it's my misunderstanding. So these are all permits, whether it's like to put on a screen door or a porch or build a commercial building or put in new windows at a commercial building. So it's all of that together.
Yes.
Okay, so I was thinking more of like new construction.
No, we're looking at total construction
That
value
makes-
across all permits. And that's why I say the permit count
It's
doesn't
kind of- I
really
get
tell a
that.
story.
Totally, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
So, but the volume is material. It is definitely partially driven by cost. But that change from residential to commercial is a pretty material one as well. Molly, you brought up the water company. The water company is a great example of data we can't use and why the fact that we can't use it tells a story, because they haven't been able to issue allocation for several years now because they don't have the capacity to meet the demand. So that in itself means we can't use their volume numbers
Right.
because it's artificially got a ceiling on it. But the fact that it has a ceiling tells us things about that demand.
What I also think, not to be like
It's a good
Chicken
answer.
Little here, the sky is falling, right? But if we're at 30% on our commercial, if 30% of our building permits are commercial and the numbers are that high, we all have to remember that's with a cap in the water district. So once the water company is able to increase their volume and that cap comes off, I think
We know there are more projects.
we
waiting in the
know
wings.
that there are projects that are waiting. Yeah, and they
That's
have
really-
been
that's
waiting, and
really
they're
a
very
great point,
organized
Molly.
to go, so
Yeah.
things are gonna fly, and we need to be ready for that.
That's a really great point.
But there's also a question, dovetailing, and commercial, I'm on commercial because it's visible, it's not, where is this mystery house I'm never gonna find? I think we pretty much see it. And how much of it is new and how much of it is rebuilt? I mean, I think that's a big factor.
And that you're gonna have to do anecdotally. That's not something we can pull out of the numbers. It's just not
Yeah.
tracked that way, but.
But whether you're spending, well, anyway,
Well, but I
yes.
thi- but I think
I
that-
get,
but I
I get
think-
what you're
I think
asking.
that's really
Yeah.
important. If you're, and I don't know, I can't imagine, the hygiene was done before last year, wasn't it? That's a complete rebuild, but it's not a new place. Hmm? How long ago was that? I said hygiene.
There's a subjective side to that commercial element too, and as a community, figuring out how much of it we want to support or subsidize or not. But I would say that even if it's a replacement on the commercial side, Martha, what we're feeling is an additional demand for a level of service that comes with that replacement. They're replacing a $200 a night hotel room with a $500 a night hotel room. And the customer that tends to come with that, for better or worse, has a different set of expectations for the services around them. And how are we going to respond to that as a community?
And I guess we get into a philosophical thing here, but I think my response to some of that, and I know what the biggest first question is for some of the larger hotels and wedding parties. And that's not something the town's going to be providing. I mean, the town's not going to be providing a spa for wedding parties to go to. That's up to the hotels to build, if they're going to be building them. If that's, I mean, there are demands and needs that have nothing to do with us.
I think we have to, it's really important to regularly, and this is, I love about Barbara's question. You really have to return to the base case. And the base case is we are all feeling growth pressure that is resulting in demands or burdens or spending. We have frankly an artificial cap. And at some point we've got to rebase given that cap.
I'm just looking for harder information than I have. And the 30% does jump out at me as not a, when I look at the size of the big new houses that are going up and the complexity of them, and what I can see of commercial property that's being built, it seems like there's a lot more private.
So one of the things I see sort of that I wonder whether you're taking into consideration would be, so there's one neighborhood on the island where there are 3 houses that I think 2 have been taken down so far. A third is scheduled to be taken down. Those are going to the dump. So, we're talking about our antiquated transfer station that, I mean, we all remember when it was a pile of garbage with seagulls on it, right? But now it's a transfer station. The building is extremely antiquated, needs to be replaced, but they're taking in entire demolished houses now. Again, not something that certainly didn't happen frequently in the past. And these are big houses that are coming into there. That's part of this as well. And then the other thing is, like, I drove down your road the other day, and your road is a
Mhm.
mess because heavy equipment, and it happened on my road as well. And it's really frustrating when a giant piece of equipment comes down your adorable, tiny dirt road, and then they run up one side and they run up the other side, and like those tire marks don't go away. And then you've got to figure out, like, how do you fix that, right? Somebody has to fix that. Now, your road is a town road, so the road crew is gonna have to go fix that, right?
I hate to say this, but I've watched those things, particularly this time of year. fade into themselves. The problem is the biggest piece of equipment hasn't come yet. If this were the end of it, I think we'd be fine down there.
But what I'm saying,
know-
Martha, is
I
they
know.
do damage
Yeah.
to our roads. And I can tell you my sweet little dirt road looks really bad right now. And it means my neighbors and I are gonna have to go fix it. But on your road, we're gonna be paying the town road crew to repair that, and on other roads like that.
Which brings up another question, again, which is totally outside of the purview of anything here, but.
It's
And
never stopped us before,
it's never-
Martha.
And of course, it never crosses my mind until it happens next door to me. And the only way out or in from my house and my neighbors, do we ever require bonding of these properties that are bringing in? Right now, 7 containers is going to be a crane. There've been multiple pieces of, to say nothing of fire trucks and smoke. I'm not gonna let that one go. And
It's a really good question. We should ask Mike.
but I do, because I mean, ours, at least mine is a town road.
Bond for the damage, potential damage to public property. I assume that towns do that.
I don't think we have. I don't think we ever have we?
I've only heard discussion of that, Martha. Can we get hard numbers on total permits year over year? The answer is yes on that. And then also, can we get total tonnage on the dump to help with Mrs. McMillan's question?
Yep.
I think that would help moving forward. Thanks.
There have been some instances where the town has held a bond. It's usually in conjunction with special use permits. So where they may be applicable and where they're not, is something we can look at further, but.
Terrific.
But I do think that's where resiliency, and I really wish we would stop saying sea rise, because by the time people stop arguing about sea rise, you spent half the meeting and just talk about resiliency and climate change.
Were you reading Judy Gray's mind? Because we were talking about, she was talking to me about exactly that point
Well, good.
2 days
Um,
ago.
But that really ties in with, I think resiliency ties in with the landfill, ties in with all of these buildings that are coming down. And that's something that, and I'm feeling like super old these days. But man, when they took down buildings, they used to use them. They didn't throw them away.
One more thing, Amy, can we also get the water allocations too in the future? No less.
By the way, on the water, Molly, that was a really good point, and important to point out that is part of that's the important part of the rationale behind having a gross tonnage allocation for a gross gallonage allocation for public projects, because it used to be a percentage. And every time someone took an allocation, the amount that was available, actually the gross, it was a percentage of a smaller gross amount, right? I think is the fair way to say it. So, the water, Amy and John and the Water Authority, I think were really wise to change that. Because I hadn't really thought about that, but it's true. There's pent up demand that we're not even seeing yet.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really,
Lined up demand.
yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I have no idea. John might kill me for saying this, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if, because they're going to a certain size, right? What if we hit the roof on that too? That's gonna happen pretty quickly,
I worry about that.
because, it's not an end, the water in the ground isn't the problem. But, they have this whole reverse osmosis system. You can only remove, you can only process the water so fast. And so it's limited how much they can do every day.
Right.
There's another reason to get that water pump.
Yes. Indeed. It's another part of the rationale for the saltwater pump is.
Yes, I have some questions if we're gonna go to saltwater pump.
I had hoped that someone with more expertise than any of us have would be here at this hearing to talk about the pump.
Well, this is why I'm sort of distressed that there's not people here, because I have a lot of questions for the fire department about the saltwater pump. 100% in favor of getting a saltwater pump. We are incredibly lucky that another, that one of the supporting fire departments, or I'm not sure who brought that, but somebody brought a saltwater pump to that party, and thank God, because the whole downtown is still here. And so I'm not saying that we don't need it. I'm wondering, what do we know about it? Like, I'm concerned about some of these numbers because these numbers feel like guesstimates to me, like ballpark. Like, I know that one company brought their saltwater pump out here and it got tried out, but that was one company. Is that the one they are gonna buy? Like, have they looked at others? Does that dollar amount include getting the pump here? Does it include a place to store that pump?
I would
Does it
really urge you
include-
to talk to Chris Hobie or Kirk Littlefield about that one. I
Yes, but
because
I mean,
I had-
where are they? And
well, I know,
doing that right
I had a similar conversation today and it was
Yeah.
helpful to me.
So
Okay.
I'll ask them to come to the
yeah.
meeting on the 10th.
But,
Because
I mean,
they're really
I'm
not.
not disagreeing with you.
I know, but I guess I'm looking at Mary Ann because like, if you didn't get all these answers from them, why is it on here? And where are they to give us these answers, right? Like, we're considering going over, we're considering asking for an override, right? That's a very big deal to the taxpayers. But if it's for things that we have to have, which I think this is one, where are all the details? Where are the details? And what does that price include? Does that include, like, if it's a portable pump, how is that gonna be moved? If there's a fire in New Harbor, is there a vehicle that goes with that to tow it? Because how big is it? How much does it weigh? Does it need its own vehicle, or does it have its own, motor on it? Is it drivable? I don't
No,
know. I
no.
don't know what it is. So
It's my
you know.
understanding, they will need your trailer, and that's how it gets moved, and they already have, it's my understanding, and I think you need to have the fire chief here to clarify it, that they'll tow it. It's my understanding that the $350,000 is about 50% of what it costs for the pump. So if you want more details than that, I'll be more than happy to have the fire. Well, he's still away. I think Kurt can come to the
I
next.
thought
meeting.
Kirk was going
Right,
to
so
be here.
here's the other thing, right? So I did talk to someone in the fire department, did talk to me the other day about this, and they really wanted us to consider putting this entire amount into this year's budget. So what I would say is, if we're using it as a sinking fund and putting half in this year, then I guess I don't need all these answers, right? Because we're looking at,
Of course you do.
right, I kind of think I do
Yeah,
too, but
we all-
if we have a
we-
year
we
to
need-
like
yeah.
wait.
Well, we need them, Molly. We all need them.
And I guess the other thing I'm asking is this enough money, right? Is this just for the pump, or did they actually factor in? Like, I don't know how big it is, right? If it's as big as this table, it's not gonna fit in the fire department that we have built right now. So it's gonna need a storage place. Where is that storage place? Do we need to build one? Is that included in the cost? Do you understand? I'm not trying to be a pain. I love the fire department.
You're not being a pain.
But I want to make sure all the costs related to this are included. And that we're not guessing, that we know how much it's going to cost. And then we can talk about whether we put the entire cost in this year or do a 50-50.
I think the answer still involves having the fire department here to speak to this directly, but their request in the capital program was for 500,000 originally, and that was in the discussions for the pump itself. And throughout that conversation, it became clear that there were other ancillary costs, which is how it went from 5 to 7 to include the trailer, delivery, all the other things.
Okay.
And so that was bumped up on our end through that conversation about their original submittal. I would say from my perspective, that was part of the 2-year funding strategy, because there did seem to be considerations that were still being worked through on the fire department end. And so while there was an intellectual commitment to move forward with this concept, as we work out some of the implementation details, a 2-year funding strategy would move us towards the funding goal and allow time for risk refinement of the concept. So that was some of my approach in splitting it up. I think Mary Ann was probably on board with that as well.
And it's not unusual, especially with capital projects, to fund things over a 2-year period of time.
Yeah, I think the general theme, and it came up in the audience as well, is just having a bucket of money and not being really clearly defined and not having a plan on it isn't what we want. So I think you're gonna work to get everybody.
Terrific. Anybody else? David?
On that topic, whoever is going to become the subject matter expert after Kirk does a brain dump at the next public hearing, somebody has to also be prepared to present it to financial town meeting, because you can be sure that everybody won't have heard it discussed previously. So it's really, the expertise has to be available for two cycles,
Yes.
not just the public hearing.
Yes.
That could go to any other departments within the town as well.
Indeed. Yeah. I think, yes. I have an approach in mind, but Lisa, how are you? It's good to see you, as always.
Lisa Robb, speaking on behalf of the school. I was speaking with a resident today, not affiliated with the school, and she had mentioned, she said, the school is the heart of the community. And it's something that I constantly am thinking about, many of us think about often. We're continually trying to strive to improve the school, but with our proposed 4% increase that's been now reduced to a 2.5% proposal, we're going to be losing that forward momentum. We will not be able to move forward and grow with if some of the necessary programs are cut, and if rider requirements and student needs are not being met. And if we don't have the supported quality teachers and staff and administration that we currently have, or that we're constantly getting turnovers for. Currently, a large percentage of our teachers are actually working multiple jobs just to afford to be able to live here on the island. By cutting the budget for the school, you're also impacting the community at large, not just now, but in the future as well. How many of our graduates return to the island are town council members, teachers, town employees. They all, but all of them, their place in the community started at the Block Island School. We want to prepare them to be able to return to the school and not feel like they have to return to the island, and feel like they have to. Very
Thank you,
nice.
Lisa.
Lisa, can you speak to anything that you think was cut? It's difficult for me to look at this and see like what was asked for that was cut. Do you know, Marianne?
So what happens, what we do here at the council level, we're not allowed to do any line item reduction. They asked for an appropriation of 4%. First round, we had it reduced to 2%. We did increase it to 2.5. So we give that back to the school, and they're the ones that make that determination. We do not do line item adjustments to their budget.
Right, no, I understand how that works, but I guess what I'm asking Lisa is if they've had conversations, like, obviously, if you came back to them and said, you're not getting 4%, you're getting 2.5%, then they had to have the follow-up discussion of like, where are we gonna take that from, right? So that's what you're saying, things are getting lost. I'm asking you, like, what do you think is getting lost?
Some of the additional requests that Bob had put in the school budget, which you'll see in one of the following pages in the school budget. Some of those programs are definitely going to have to be cut. We're also in the middle of our negotiations And they did put a 2.5 placeholder for salary increases. And so a lot of the things that we're requesting in our negotiations are probably gonna end up getting cut. And if they don't get cut, or if, you know, if things change in the negotiations, then other line items are gonna have to get cut as well.
Thanks.
Sideways. Bear with me for a second. No, I got it. Thank you.
Can you remind me, the public safety communications coordinator, which budget is that in?
Central dispatch.
It's in central dispatch, okay.
Now, was the full recommendation for full-time or part-time employee?
It's a full-time employee with the start time being sometime in the first quarter of the next fiscal year.
Did Mr. Conant, has he given a timeline on his retirement?
Not really specifically a timeline. We look at it as possibly being a transition period. That time transition, we're not sure until we start getting into it. It could be as much as at least a year, I would think, based on the number of years that Howell has been involved and the expertise he has and what he's done.
The need for him to train and be potentially be compensated for that if he, you know, I mean, I think we need to be open to.
Right. I've talked about that the potential compensation for him as we do the transition, yes.
So in the budget, it's listed as $60,000, but if that's not a hire till, until fall, that means that it'll be in next year's budget for 120.
We're only talking 3 months into next year, not half a year. It's about a 75% budget. And we don't know what the cost is going to be until we get it out on the street and have some idea.
So do we have a job description for this job yet?
That's in the process with both. I've asked Paul Dean and Howell to work on that together.
Okay, so that was my other question, because Paul seemed pretty shocked by this last week. Who's involved in writing that job description?
I've asked Howell to get some information on the job description. I've asked Paul Dean to get some information. I reached out to fellow town managers and asked them to provide us with job description for similar positions that they have in their community.
And then, part of that initial discussion we had about this, I have a note here that, we had a short conversation about having other departments that benefit from the radios chip in for this. So is that part of the plan, or is that still to be developed too?
So this is a town position, and we have other town positions that other departments benefit. And so we just budget in that position, in that particular department. So this is in central dispatch, if that's what you're saying. So that's where that position will stay, and that's where we'll fund it from. I'm not sure what you mean by another department.
I don't know. The note that I have here, we had a short discussion about would sewer, water, power, medical center, et cetera, also chip in? Meaning, like, would we, like, since sewer, water, power, medical center all have radios, would we be asking them to pay for part of this?
That's something we can explore. If you remember correctly, we do that with sewer and water now. We do provide accounting services for them, and we do ask them to potentially pay for part of those services. And we do that when we meet with them every October, and we can present again the cost of the services, and then we can have that conversation.
Hey, Molly, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
This is really valuable, but we're in our public hearing.
Okay.
So we need to, if there isn't any more public conversation, we need to adjourn that. then, we have to talk about homestead. If we need to have another meeting, or if we do it on the 10th, this is all really important. I'm trying to,
Okay.
you know what I mean? I'm not trying to stop conversation. I'd be happy to have another meeting to talk about that, or.
All right, I'm just gonna throw out my last two things that I have notes about then, which is, under community service or community support. Um, so under community support, I'm hoping that we can reduce the amount that we're supporting the early learning center to half of their total budget. Right now, we are, the town, the taxpayers are supporting that private business for more than 50% of their operating costs, and I don't think that's right. And I totally believe we should have preschool, we should have daycare available but for the taxpayers to pay more than half seems extreme. So it's a small reduction to $141,892 rather than $147,785. That would be my thought. The other is I also believe that we should level fund the medical center at $395,000. In 2022, we funded them at $338,500, which means that over the last 2 years, the taxpayers have increased their contribution by $56,500. And also earlier this year, we gave them $150,000 of the ARPA money so they could buy a new generator.
It's our building.
Yep, but the money, I understand that, right? And that is why I voted for that.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I think another $14,000 is excessive. It is also a private business. So, you know, I mean, I think $56,500 over the last 2 years that's substantial. Like, maybe we should just let that cool off a little bit. Like, we've given them an awful lot of money this year. And $395,000 is a lot of money. That's all.
Can I have a motion to close the public hearing, please? Second, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Opposed, no. The public hearing is closed. Now we'll move on to homestead exemption. That conversation.
Lock the doors.
Exactly. This is important, Lisa. Okay. So just quick introduction. Everybody who's been paying attention knows the background on ongoing conversation and work occurring around potential restructuring of our property tax system. We got broader permissions from the legislature last year after working on it for a couple of sessions, just like many other towns across the state, to have, shall we say, a more nuanced property tax system. But and had relatively recently committed, and I would recommit to a broader conversation around what our property tax system ought to look like. But I think with the budget that we have before us, even if it is tweaked, reduced, increased, whatever, I think has raised or accelerated our need to to consider possible homestead tax exemption. We've talked about that at this table for the last, since the budget was introduced, I think. At a meeting recently, Neil and I agreed to work with Marianne and Amy on sort of background and what this might look like. Thought it would be worthwhile for Amy to kind of walk us through the memo that she provided to the council and the public tonight. Because this is not plowing new ground in the state, and it's certainly, if you do a little research, not plowing new ground in communities that are similar to ours, where there's a significant, not only significant commercial activity, but also significant number of houses that are not occupied year round. It is not uncommon. The Google machine spit out a lot of articles when you do homestead tax analysis. So I think what I'm hoping we end up with here, just sort of for your background procedurally, if we were to decide to do a homestead tax exemption, that would be done by ordinance. That would not be a financial town meeting decision. The levy would be certainly, but so we have to be proceeding on a parallel track, ordinance and sort of the FTM budget process, if you will. And it is our hope that that next week we would have for the council a more formal sort of proposal / structure. I think that's fair, right, Amy? So Amy, would you like to go through this?
Amy, just for people listening, would you just highlight what the Homestead Act will solve for, just in case no one knows?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The Homestead Act, what that gives us, what would we be achieving by using?
Sure, it's a strategy. It's a strategy to relieve some tax burden associated with owner-occupied residences. Is a pretty general way to say it. And the town of New Shoreham is enabled under state statute to enact a homestead exemption as we see fit, as Keith mentioned, by ordinance. So all of that already exists in the law. 11 of the 39 communities in Rhode Island have either a homestead exemption or a similar strategy to provide residential tax relief. There are of those 3 strategies, and you can see them listed here under the form column. They can be a tax credit, which is usually a flat amount, reducing your tax bill. That's the least common. There are 2 communities, Newport and Middletown, who have introduced a new structure, which is an owner-occupied residential tax rate. And that's sort of the new hip thing in this residential tax relief program, where they actually have a differential tax rate if you're owner occupied in your home. It achieves a similar goal as a homestead exemption. I would say for us, it's not the right fit right now. It creates some unintended consequences that we're not equipped to handle at the moment. And so the majority of communities you can see on this list use a typical homestead exemption. And this is usually done as a percentage, and it's a reduction of your assessed value. So if your assessed value is $1 million and we have a homestead exemption of 10% and you meet all of that criteria, your assessed value after the exemption is $900,000, and we calculate your tax bill based on the mill rate after that. Good so far? I won't go through the details of every community, but the different columns have some interesting elements across them that I think are worth talking about. One is that form that I think homestead exemption right now is the right form for New Shoreham to be considering. The next column there is the amount. It's a little premature for us right now to talk about the amount. There's actually still some work that we need to do on the assessing side, which we'll do in the next week or so to come back to that question of what is the right amount for property tax relief for New Shoreham. But you can see the ranges there, and they are from 5% up to 45%. And so there's a pretty big variation. And then some of them do make distinctions between a single family residence and a 2 or a 3 family dwelling. In terms of that applicability column, what's interesting here is they all apply to owner occupied residences, pretty straightforward. But Newport, which is on the second page, also has a provision for rental units with year-round leases. So if you own a rental unit and you have a tenant there who is there year-round and you have a lease with them, Newport allows that property to have the benefit of a homestead exemption, assuming that the tenant meets all the residency requirements in the ordinance.
I like
again,
that.
something that we may just want to talk about as we try as a community to encourage year-round rental opportunities as well. In the requirements column, we start to talk about how do you prove it? How do you qualify? And again, there's a lot of variation in how communities have set this up. In most cases, you need several forms of identification. The most common seem to be driver's license, vehicle registration, voter registration. Sometimes it's 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5. Sometimes it's you need to meet all of these and one other. Particularly if this is something we're going to push for quick implementation, the more straightforward, the better. And on the administration side of this, there are some things that our office is less than comfortable holding. You know, I don't want everybody's tax return front pages, honestly, although some communities use that.
Yeah.
But you know, there's management of that information that gets trickier.
Of course, it strikes me the value of the driver's license and voter registration both, having done this in the last 10 years. They also have their own requirements to demonstrate that you are eligible for them. You know what I mean? It's not, you can't just walk into DMV and say, hi, I'd like a Rhode Island driver's license. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember having to go to DMV with a packet. So.
And just about everybody all forms are requiring an affidavit that represents that this is your primary residence. They may define that differently. Some of them use sort of a more legal term of domicile. Some of them say that you need to be a resident at least by being here at least 6 months out of the year, which is Middletown. Newport says 7 months. Others don't specify. They just want you to follow that sort of IRS legal definition of a domicile and where you represent your primary residence is. In most cases, those are notarized forms. So you're swearing that to a notary and then submitting that as part of your application. So that, that out here is always a little bit tricky as we define residence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be as hard as we sometimes make it, if
Right.
you will.
Yeah. Well, to me, there's a difference between, I think you can be a year-round resident and spend a month in Florida. I don't think it's, to your point, I don't think it's as hard as we sometimes
It is
make
pretty common to just to have that representation that this is my primary residence.
Yes.
I don't have another primary residence, and it is where I represent that I live.
Right.
So, That's typically the form that we use.
Don't we have, I thought we had an ordinance that had 9 months.
That's certainly something we'll be looking
I know
for
we do.
conformity with, but is it 9 months, Millie?
Yeah, she's saying that.
Yeah, great.
Is that a general ordinance or is that for? Yeah. I wasn't sure whether it was, because I know there's eligibility for a mooring or eligibility for a shellfish license or, yeah.
So then the last one that comes up a lot is how often you renew this application. Some communities just say one time, apply, and you're pretty much good, although in all cases, the community allows the assessor to require additional follow-up if necessary. So they keep that discretion. Other communities have an annual renewal where you're applying every year and making these representations annually. And then a few of them have a 3-year window. So every 3 years, you're resubmitting those applications and affidavits. The final column there gets to how they treat mixed use business and commercial. Some of them are strictly residential. So if there's any commercial element to the property, they're not eligible. Others, particularly in communities that already have a tax rate differential, meaning their residential and commercial rates are different, they are already assessing their properties with that proration. And so it becomes very easy for them to continue to apply that proration
Mhm.
in the exemption. For us, we don't do that. We don't commingle tax rates since we have just a single rate. So, a hybrid might look a little bit like a sliding scale that you can see on the single, 2 and 3 family where you have a reduced exemption percentage would be something we would consider there.
So let's say, so here, like, I can think of one example, and there's obviously more, right, of someone who has a business, right, with more than a couple apartments above, but they don't live in those apartments, but they rent them out to other people year round. Is this something we could figure out a way to extend that to? Somebody who's providing year-round housing to a lot of people, but they don't actually live in the building themselves.
And so that starts to trigger 2 potential boxes. It triggers the mixed commercial residential, mixed use. And it starts to trigger would we consider a program that also allowed year-round resident rentals to be qualified? So that's mixing those 2 together, and that's something we need to talk about.
That's the only thing I had written down was year-round. That's where the year-round rental, my darn microphone, is really where the wheels have always fallen off the wagon before. Because you do get to a place that just Molly just described that isn't the residence of the folks who own, or may not be the residence of the folks who own it, but has residential year-round units in it.
And I think it's, again, I don't know, maybe the idea is we build this foundation and see where we have challenges, but to me, I think I would assume probably the 5 of us agree that if someone is, let's be kind about it, broad-minded enough or generous enough to want to rent their house year round to a school teacher, and they don't live here, but they're making their house available for that. I think it enables more affordability in the rent and that sort of thing. So if we do a filing of a lease or and as you put this, I think correctly, Amy, as long as the person who's renting it is eligible for treatment as Block Island being the primary residence, I would think that would be enough. At least until we figure out that it's a giant loophole that we have to fix.
I was only talking about people
Oh,
who
yeah,
actually live here who
right.
don't live in that building.
Right. Good
Well,
point.
What they're saying is, so if you had a year-round rental and the person has the driver's license and the voting record, then we would qualify that homeowner as under this because
But
it's
regardless of
benefiting.
where they are, where the homeowner.
Correct.
Right.
That was
As long as they apply a year-long lien.
And what if you have, and what if you have, what if you live here and have a commercial building that's a commercial building, but has a year-round place in it that you rent? Does that come into the same thing?
We kind of talked about, I'm one of those awkward, I live in my building,
Oh, I wasn't
but it's a
thinking.
commercial building. How would I get treated? Or if there's multiple units, you live in one, but you rent another one, those are some of the nuances we would definitely have to work.
That's.
Also, I think it is important what Amy said earlier about the year-round leasee. The tenant should also meet the same criteria, right? So that
Yes.
we're not giving a tax break to somebody who rents, rents a space in their house to, somebody who pays year-round rent, but lives in Florida.
Yes. Right.
And I do think, I'm always surprised when I go through town, particularly through town, and realize that the number of living spaces there are there.
Yeah.
People live in year round that, you just don't think of, because they don't have yards
Right.
and they don't have cars, you just see.
Yeah, we were talking about that too. So we're going to be working over the next few days on this and we'll report back.
Yeah,
So-
I mean,
Let's
it's,
start somewhere.
I
The
guess I'm
timeline is tight.
asking, does it sound like the path that we're heading down is consistent with the direction the council wants to go in terms of refining some of those parameters? And here's why I ask. Keith mentioned the parallel path, and if this is something the council's targeting for this next tax bill, it is a very tight time frame to make that happen. And we'd be looking at a public hearing in May, which means we're looking at a draft ordinance for publication at the end of April. So our
Yep.
next step is really to start drafting an ordinance and trying to bring in these parameters.
My opinion for what it's worth is that at our next conversation, we should have either of the solicitors there to be drafting so that we have something for the council to look at ASAP.
Obviously, a component of this is if you're renting something out year-round, it also has to be a legal rental.
Yes.
I don't want to think. I'm just saying, we're talking about 513s.
Well, if they apply for it, and then if it's not illegal, they don't apply for it.
Yeah, and of course
I
that's.
mean, this is again why this always fell apart, because it was always what if. And I think at some point you just have to start with whatever, however basic you can make it. Presume people are gonna tell the truth until they've proven, until, the next day when they prove they don't, but at least give them a day and go from there.
But Molly, I think you're right. So
Yes.
if I considered my side building of 513 and it's illegal, and I don't have voter registration and a driver's license tying me to here, it wouldn't qualify because that's not a legal 513 recognized by the town.
Right, I mean, I'm stating the obvious here
Yeah.
a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
no, but it's an important point, I
But
think.
I mean, we might get people who show up and want the tax break, but didn't really stop to think that they're renting something out that's illegal. I don't think people understand what illegal means, so that's the other, it's a zoning infraction. It's,
There was one other item that came up that we'll talk about and should continue to talk about, and I don't know whether this is probably both Millie and Amy, but what sort of infrastructure do you expect to need in order to, to meet the initial demand and applications or whatever? That's
Nobody's going there.
Yeah. Well,
So-
I just want to be
It's-
respectful
it
about
is-
whatever the division of labor is.
But in theory, you're talking about a window, not an all-year
Right.
position, and you're talking about hiring a temp position to fill it,
Potentially, if you
not an
feel,
additive head.
potentially. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah,
I
so these are
just think we need
typically-
to fairly consider that, just like we are for short-term rental. you know?
Typically administered through the assessor's office. If we did this year, we're looking at only a month-long window, which is really tight anyway for application. It would be extraordinarily narrow, which would be a burden, but it'll be what it'll have to be. And I don't even know that we'd be able to ramp up to bring in temp staff. We'll just,
Yeah.
we'll just do it. But yes, typically that window of application is about 3 months long. For most communities, if they're doing an annual or every 3-year renewal, and
So you'd
there is-
open it in April and
January 1 to March. to
oh, I
March
see.
31st is
Gotcha,
usually
gotcha.
when it happens.
Jeez.
And, there is software that facilitates that. Again, whether we'd be up and running this year or not, is hard to say.
Well, I'd like to vote that Keith sits at a help desk all the time.
I could be like Lucy.
And we'll pay. Stop talking.
Exactly. I know, that's right, exactly.
So just to complicate this, you just mentioned the potential short-term rental ordinance. So if we pass that, then there's sort of that out there too, right? Like, so people can't really double dip on this, right? Like if they pull a short-term rental license for their unit, they can't also claim that they need a tax break because they've got a year-round tenant. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I think if you pull a short-term rental permit, you sort of,
Assuming
sort of
it's a single
exclude
family
yourself.
dwelling, that's a reasonable assumption. I think you could have a property structure that allowed both uses. So I don't think it's always a true statement, although it is a generally true statement.
right. I'm not on this committee, so this is Neil's and Keith's problem to sort out.
Molly, those are all good scenarios to be raising, which we,
Let me throw another bomb at you. No, it's,
but you could have,
it
you
must-
could have, so what pops to mind is someone lives on their boat for the summer and they rent, and then they rent their house for the 3 months of the summer. Would they still qualify? According to the 9 months, technically they would, as long as they have a driver's license. So if you did short-term rental, that wouldn't stop you from qualifying, right? Is that where you were going? The short-term rental would disqualify you?
but it would, there would be qualifiers on it, like as long as
Right.
it's your primary residence.
Right.
If it's not your primary residence and you pulled the permit, like you're out, right? But.
Well, it
it's-
wouldn't qualify anyway, because if it's not your primary residence, then it doesn't matter if you rent it or not.
Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of, there's gonna be a lot of straightforward on this and then a lot of like,
Well, and then this is a kind of walk before you run, right? Because the second year, we can deal with potentially all the one-offs or groups that we don't anticipate the first year.
It is an ordinance of the town, which means as we learn more about what works and what doesn't, the town council has the opportunity to modify the ordinance.
Barbara? I'm sorry, I meant to ask you this long time ago. The power company rate structure these days, I'm not at all familiar with it. And I apologize for that. How are houses that are multifamily, have 2 apartments, are they, is there a different rate for those than for single family?
No, our rates are residential, commercial, basically. We have a municipal rate, but there's only one person, one group in that. So if you have like, say, 2 rental apartments in one building, they would be on the both would be on the residential rate, but they usually have a separate meter. So they're metered separately.
So there's no information bank, nothing to call there.
You could see, the only thing you would see is that there's 2 meters, right, as opposed to just one.
All right.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Amy or anything?
Just the timeline on this, it feels a little rushed.
It does.
It's compressed.
And,
Yes, it
you
is.
know, we want this program to roll out properly in the beginning. Is it possible right now?
We're gonna find out.
Okay.
I mean, we're gonna find out. I mean, you know.
I would say it is at the moment technically possible. I think Marianne has shared some milestones, and failure to meet those means one of 2 choices. Either we push off mailing and due dates of the tax bills to accommodate a small delay, or we decide to implement in a subsequent tax year. And then if those milestones slip even further, then obviously you're automatically moving to a different year.
Thank you.
And it depends upon how straightforward the first go at this is.
Yes.
That's what can sink it.
I think that's
That's what
right.
has sunk it in the past,
I agree with that.
over and over again. The what ifs.
David?
This may be premature, but that's part of my reputation, I guess, is asking questions that are hard too early. So if you're successful in getting it as far as we've talked tonight, have you talked at all about the appeal process and who's cognizant of that? What town office?
That didn't come up today,
Okay.
but thank you for raising it. Anything else on this item? Before we move to our exciting grant? So we have before us approving the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank Municipal Resiliency Program Grant Agreement. Marianne?
So if the council remembers, we applied for a grant through the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, and we received $465,000, I think it is. So what's before you this evening is, and I think it's on your consent agenda, is the approval of the grant document that we sign off on, so that we can begin moving forward with the process of next steps with this project. This is a huge project, and we will be putting out an RFP, will be the next step to hire an engineer, most likely an engineering firm. And it will be a request for qualifications, which means it's not a bid or a request for proposals. And that will be the next step as we move forward with this project, which will be a project over the next few years. Keep in mind, we also received a NIFWIF grant that also helps offset this to the tune of 185,000. Yeah, that's 185,000.
Where's our match coming from?
NIFWIF.
NIFWF. Okay, I just wanted to make that clear on the
Yeah.
record.
Yeah, there's no, there is a small match that is, we also have some in-house like kind
Mm-hmm.
expenses that were included, which we can use as part of.
Sure.
that, which happens a lot in most grants.
So just simple, that's a difference of what, 5,000, right? That's what we're looking at for the next.
Yep.
Is that continuing? Correct. So it just leaves the 5,000?
I think we have in kind
In kind, right,
that will make that up.
correct,
Yes.
exactly.
So this is not a request for any town appropriation. This is an approval of entering into the contract, and sort of approval, essentially, is this scope what you want? I understand from your perspective, this is a scope that we embrace.
Yes, Judy Gray again, Sands Pond Road. And yes, as a representative of the Sea Level Rise Committee, I was on the negotiating calls with Allison, town planner, and the town manager, Marianne. And all of these numbers are what we negotiated with the infrastructure bank. One of the most important numbers in there is the implementation number. We felt like we wanted to be able to hold our heads up at the end of this project and actually have done something besides just planning. And so that's why there's an implementation number in there, even though the grants were mainly for planning.
Great.
Thank you.
I would like to thank again, the folks who worked on this grant and you, Mary Ann, Allison.
Yeah, Allison did the bulk of it.
Yeah. So are there any questions before I ask for a motion? Can I have a motion to approve, the, what is this called? The grant agreement?
With Rhode Island Infrastructure.
Yes, for the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. Is there a second? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. And thank you all very much. I have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Opposed, no. Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, David, Judy.